So I'm Scott Murray. I'm going to talk about maintaining your Yocto project-based distribution. I work for a consulting company called Yocto Group. We do a lot of embedded Linux development with Open Embedded Yocto. And so over the last few years, I've done a lot of maintenance on people's projects. So just some goals. I'm going to quickly go through some of the distribution maintenance options and trade-offs of them, discuss some potential pitfalls that you might not immediately sort of see right off when you start working with Yocto project and Open Embedded, and discuss some specific maintenance tasks and some of the gotchas with them. So as I mentioned, I've done several large distribution upgrades going from across like some big, 5 or 6 version up type of things like that. And one of the things I'll have to sort of give as a little caveat is not everybody uses Open Embedded in the same way, and your requirements might be different than some of the things I've run into. And of course, everyone has different product requirements. So there's things to do with scheduling and when you decide to use a particular release that might be specific to your business requirements. Just as a quick run through of maintenance requirements. So if you're building a system nowadays, you're going to have a lot more software than you would have in the past. Pretty typically, things are all internet connected and Internet of Things. We have to actually include a lot more sort of stuff in the stack to actually enable some of these, big cloud types of products that everyone wants to build these days. And with that, there's a substantially increased need to address bugs, security features, and security issues, and because all these things have a lot more network access than we would have had 10, 15 years ago, and it's actually quite rare now. I mean, we look at some of the things that hit the news. If you ship a product and you don't have an upgrade path, you're going to have a bad time of it. I mean, you don't want to be on the front page of newspapers or on the nightly news with a product that has a really severe security flaw and not have ever thought about how you're going to actually push out an update. And so we need to plan for this. And so it's very easy. We've been, if you've been at the EL or have been through the beginner track or had the Linux Foundation training on how to start using Yocto project, it means it's not too bad to get started and build an image and start adding packages. But if you want to think about, well, how am I actually going to maintain this product line that I'm basing on Yocto? So you need to keep in mind that Yocto project releases pretty much are in this 1 to 2 year window of release. It's like sort of like 18 months-ish because basically only the last 2 stable releases are maintained. So you only have these 3 releases sort of in flight at any given time. And there are no long-term releases. And so for the last couple of years at the developer meetings, there's been a bunch of discussion about trying to get a long-term stable branch made. But it's very difficult because it's quite resource intensive. And it's not something that a lot of the community can really kind of get together to do. And especially there's commercial entities that do this. So Wind River and of course Mentor and several other companies do basically provide this long-term support. So that's something you might actually have to think about depending on what your model for doing maintenance is. So if you want to do it yourself, so the two approaches are you basically stay on the upgrade treadmill. You need to stay in that 18 to 24 month release cycle. Keep on a release that's new enough that it's receiving support from the community. Or you actually shoot for shipping your product with a particular release and you in-house do backport things. And so generally the community recommends the first option, but of course, I mean, we have heard about it, some discussion about how do I update a product that's been shipped. That's kind of difficult. And the first option of actually like staying on that treadmill does require you actually sort of invest effort into actually tracking upstream and having an update mechanism in place. The second option, you're still going to need to potentially update your product, of course, because you're actually backporting security fixes and things like that. But the issue there is the difficulty starts to scale in a not obvious way, potentially. If you actually have a lot of software in your product and you're pulling in a whole bunch of recipes to build packages, and you're a plan like a 10 plus year, maybe a 5-year release cycle where you're going to support that to customers, it's really not obvious how much work it will be for you to actually track down security fixes for all those pieces of software and get them into your backports that you're going to do. So, of course, as well, upgrade frequency can be totally dependent on how your customers, how you interact with them. I mean, there's definitely industrial sites where they're not necessarily internet connected, and then you have to sort of be prepared where they might do infrequent updates where it's all scheduled in advance. They might actually have to have regulatory issues around they can only do an update in a particular set of hours, like every so many months and things like that. And they might actually have to go through like significant testing afterwards. And that might actually significantly gate your ability to push changes to them. So these things all kind of interact. If you do basically start trying to track upstream, the selection of what release to use and as a target for, or as a target for an upgrade basically affects your maintenance effort. So I sort of mentioned earlier, the community basically, and I think Tim mentioned earlier, basically the goal is as you're working on your product, you want to be working on master if you can. Not everybody's in a position to put that effort in necessarily. And so basically stay in the master release and, sort of, if you're in a position to do so, shoot for actually shipping your product, sort of relatively close to when master gets released as the next Yocto project release. Because then you'll know it's actually passed all of the Yocto project's QA processes, and you'll hopefully maximize your support window. You'll get those full 18 to 20 to 24 months where the community is actually pushing changes in. And so this is maximizing your upstream support. And so most people don't do this. It is hard. I mean, you actually have to work at it. I mean, Tim gave a talk at ELC where he actually has a whole bunch of automated systems to basically continuously build against master and fix the issues. These are the kinds of things you might have to do yourselves, which not everyone has the resources for. So it is pretty common to instead basically pick the newest release when you start your development cycle and work against it. But it does mean you lose potentially a big chunk of the support that you're going to get from the upstream community. So you need to think about that. So for patches, security fixes likely. So the community strategy is to basically not update to a new version that has fixes. Once a Yocto project release goes out, basically only fixes are only cherry picked. And so there isn't an upgrade to a new version. But it's not set in stone. Spectre and Meltdown have sort of triggered a bit of a change around that. So that isn't 100% true, but it is, most of the time, it is what happens is it changes back, cherry pick back. So this isn't necessarily going to work for everybody. If you have a security team at your company that's your product, and I've seen this in a couple of different companies, they actually don't like that. They run these security scanning tools against your software. They actually will ask for an image, they'll log in and run some scripts that run these tools. Basically does dash version or similar, looks at library versions and things like that. And they'll spread out a list and they'll say, well, you're running OpenSSL, that's 2 releases back and it's got these 5 CVEs in it. And then you have to explain to them, well, no, I actually have patches for those CVEs that are in there, but the version number hasn't been updated. So that complicates your life. And so that's a thing where upstream of open embedded in Yocto doesn't necessarily match with what your requirements might be. And so you might end up backporting the whole recipe in-house. I've done that. I mean, it's usually not too bad, but the QA part of that is messy because upstream they've QA'd everything. And something like OpenSSL is used by a lot of packages. So then you're actually stuck, well, is my testing equivalent to what Yocto project is doing? And that's really hard to answer. It's probably not, unfortunately, because a lot of the P tests and OE self-tests and things like that are, you have to know, that they're there and actually run them in order to sort of reproduce the testing that upstream has been doing. So you're kind of in a potentially complicated position. The other thing that can happen is you can actually get hit with requests for new features. And if you are, sort of on an older release and someone asks for a new software package or an update to a package, you might have to backport to get what they were asking for. Okay, so play with this one. Is that right? So if you do have to backport recipes, which, hopefully you don't, but I have to all the time. You want to keep them in a separate layer. A few people mentioned earlier, and it was mentioned in some of the EL talks and a couple of the talks at ELC. Documentation, quick start guide, and stuff like that for Yocto don't really hit you up right in the face when you start off that you want to create your own layers, but you really do. And it kind of keeps things separate, and you don't get things mixed together. And as well, there's the Yocto project compatibility logo. If you ever want to try and go for that, the tools check for these. If you don't want to mix things together necessarily. So, and it makes updating potentially easier to new versions. And of course, actually, Kem mentioned the bit-baked layers tool. The show overlaid subcommand of bit-baked layers is really useful when you do an update to a new release. If you've backported a bunch of things and you have them in a layer, bit-baked layer show overlay will show you basically that your backported recipe is actually potentially getting overlaid by a newer version that you're pulling in from your update. And so you want to rationalize that and potentially throw away your backports because they're now being superseded by a new version from the update that you're pulling in. So that's usually if I'm doing a big upgrade, sit there and iterate through the show overlay output and get RM recipes in my backporting layer. Vendor BSP layers are another thing that kind of can complicate this type of work. They may tie you to a specific release, and unless you actually have the resources in-house to update things to actually match, they might have a release schedule that is basically gates when you can upgrade. Examples are Meta TI and Meta Renaissance. They don't do every Yocto project release. They skip some. They alternate basically every second one, sort of. Meta Renaissance seem to be potentially changing. The Renaissance guys that I've been talking to, I work on automotive grade Linux a bit. It's been very problematic for AGL. They've had to do a significant amount of hacking sometimes to actually get new Yocto project releases to work with a Renaissance BSP layer that's a release behind. It gets messy. There's a bunch of patches and boardings, different back and forward and stuff. One of the other things about that is some BSPs are stuck in old kernels. That can be kind of painful, especially if you do graphics or you have drivers that you want to put on top. So it's not always feasible, but now with the compatibility sort of seal that Yocto project that a BSP can get certified for, hopefully that kind of solves some of the issues. So other layers, this is like you say, oh, I need package X, and you go to the layer index and you find the recipe for package X. And then you see what branch does it actually have. Does it actually have, does it only have a master branch in that Git repository that the layer is in, or does it actually have branches for each release? And so some of them actually only have a master branch, and they're sort of like basically a rolling release where the developer basically puts a commit in every few months to push it up to keep it working on master. And so that can be quite problematic for you because you'll just git clone it and it won't work with potentially the Yocto project released from 6 months ago because it doesn't match. And so that's usually not good. So you want to do some research. It's not enough for it to have a recipe in the layer index and go grab the layer and necessarily slap it down. You kind of want to see how much activity there is, if it's being maintained. And if it's on GitHub, you can sort of see some those issues and stuff. You can see if there's actually activity. So forewarned is forearmed. You want to kind of actually try and avoid surprises and create a bunch of undue maintenance effort for yourself. Okay, so as I said, if you actually you build your own distribution, this is starting to be reinforced a bit more now than it has been in the past. You really want your own set of layers, have your own distro layer. If you're actually doing your own sort of minimal BSP in-house, make a layer for that. And this bullet there's actually been some discussion now about the sort of splitting up some repositories of multiple layers. It can be really convenient to stick a bunch of layers in one Git repository, but a repo and similar tools are easy enough to use that it's easier to keep the change history separate for different things, and you might want to mix and match BSPs and distro layers and stuff like that. So if you can, keep them as separate Git repositories is really useful. And like I said, the repo, or there's some new tools. There's this thing called MyRepo, and Wind River have been developing a setup tool for piecing layers together out of the layer index. That kind of stuff actually really simplifies putting your distribution together. So those are handy, and they'll simplify maintenance because you can basically do your release management, create a branch for an upgrade, and working on it, and then bring it back in. And I think this has been mentioned as well. You really don't want to make any changes to OE core or any of the other upstream layers if you can absolutely help it. If you can't BP append something, it's better probably to hit up the mailing list or IRC and ask people if they have a suggestion of how to do it without modifying something. Because that's technical debt you'll have to carry, so we don't want that. If you're already new recipes, it's it's an open source way, but it does help you actually get that into upstream so that you'll eventually get it back when you do an upgrade. And the community is actually hopefully, looking at those recipes that you've pushed up, and you'll get some benefit of extra eyes on them, and then you actually don't need to carry it yourself anymore. Okay, let's see. So you really don't want to do a lot of customizations if you can help it. That's value add. That's what everybody wants. You have to customize for your product. But the more you do, the harder it is to do an upgrade. I've had customers that it's very painful sometimes. Even things you'd think would be very simple, like let's add a knob to the NTP daemon to do one little tweak to its behavior. NTP has a nightmare of a build system, and so what you'd think would be a simple 5-line patch can be days of work to get to work on an update. That type of stuff is not good to carry if you can help it. And an example in here I've been previously. So fsperms is to basically set default file permissions. And one customer had made a tweak to it that before I started working on it. When I went to, I think, Krogoth or Morty, basically that they were overlaying the upstream version of the file, and it triggered some really not obvious QA warnings that I had scratched my head about for several hours until I sort of circled around and dug through some Python code to see what was going on. So those kinds of things, in the grand scheme of things, their change wasn't actually required from what I could tell. So there's the things you really want to think about. Do I actually need to carry some of these changes, or can I change to work the way that upstream things should work? So you have to weigh those. Another one is FIPS support. If you build network equipment and there's those types of products, you might want to actually patch in FIPS support to OpenSSL. It's kind of painful, and keeping OpenSSL building across updates when you do that is a lot of work. Some other things that are painful potentially, things like Node.js, Ruby, Rust, and Go. They have their own package management, which doesn't necessarily merge well with building with Open Embedded. There's been some improvements since I gave this talk in Prague, but I mean, the thing that's bit me before is being asked to update to a new version of Puppet, and it's a huge hierarchy of Ruby modules or gems required for it, and all of a sudden you end up with like 15 new Ruby recipes that you have to sort of carry until upstream eventually gets updated. And that's not good. I mean, it's something that if you're on a stable release where you weren't planning to update to a new version of Yocto, you're going to have to carry those forever. And you know, it opens the door to not having enough eyes on some of your stuff like that, and more things you need to worry about, security updates and stuff. GCC. I have one customer, they have millions of lines of C++ code. So an innocuous update where I can get the distribution updated in a week or something like that, but it takes them 2 months to get all their code to build. So that kind of thing is something you have to sort of consider. It can be a really big gate on doing an upgrade, especially if they're relying on a lot of the dash warning stuff. Yes?
They avoided that because they stuck more standard.
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is, something like C++ is a moving target. I mean, so they've gotten better. That customer, they're now on C++ 14. They were on 11. And I mean, it's things like template stuff that changes underneath them. And sometimes the standard changes the behavior, and G++ isn't necessarily, it'll change. The G++ will start saying this is an error now, and it compiled perfectly fine a year ago. So it's problematic. All right, so I'm running out of time here. So if you want to sort of keep ahead of things, you might want to actually try and keep building against master. Some of the stuff like Tim's talked about doing in his talk at ELC. And that gives you an idea of what's going to be out there in the future that you have to worry about. The documentation manuals, basically, there's a documentation as a section in the reference manual. On every release, it tells you what's changed in a significant way. So a good example is the recipe-specific sysroots that came in Pyro. There's a big chunk in the manual, and basically for that release, tells you a lot of the impact and what you might have to change. So that's a good thing to look at, especially if you're behind a release or two. You can say, what am I going to have to worry about? Look it up. Okay, so I'm going to go for 2 more minutes and I'll stop. So I also have some slides here about different types of maintenance in a sort of general way. One of the things you don't really consider until you actually have a big customer that's doing some of these things, at least from a consultant viewpoint, is if you are building SDKs and they have any concerns at all, which they should, about build reproducibility, you start to have worrying about backing up SDKs because you're going to keep adding stuff to them. They might need in like 6 months, a year, 2 years to go back and build something. And so there's an SDK version variable that you can set. And it's kind of annoying in your Git history to come along and bump that, but it is useful because then when you install the SDK, it has a version number. It's sort of one of my slight issues with the extensible SDK. I have yet to wrap my head around how I could easily checkpoint it without doing a whole bulk copy of it somewhere or backing up the installer, which is doable, but it's not quite as obvious. So these things you don't want to think about beforehand because you don't want to be down the road 2 years and say, whoops, we erased opt pocky and replaced it, and now we have to dig through Git history and rebuild it. So And as well, archiving the downloads, that's a useful thing. It basically keep you so you know you have your own premier, basically. Security, I'll just quickly glance through. There's a CVE checking facility in newer releases. There's a bunch of debate over how good it is. There's ongoing work from some people to try and come up with a better thing. That might change soon. You can look at the slides here. There's some other resources about security that are kind of useful if you're actually trying to do this yourself, which can be a lot of work. And then a compliance, if you've done any of the basic or the LF course, basically there's built-in tools for license compliance. I recommend that some of these things you turn them on and you actually start archiving them. Using the source archiver, probably just leave it on actually. If you're actually doing internal releases, probably take the snapshot of the source archiver, put it somewhere and get used to doing that. Don't get on the day before the release and have the lawyer come and say, yeah, I need you to actually give me the source for this. You want to be prepared for this type of stuff. And the tools are built into the product, to Yocto to do it. So with that, I am just right on time. If you have any questions, since we're kind of short on time, you can just grab me and we can go in the hall and chat if you want. There's some references here. There's a bit of documentation on layer best practices that I'm trying to point at here. Thank you.